All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We have a few more people logging in. Then another minute for the Zoom to start for everyone. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are the Tropical Restoration Network, and we really want to thank everyone for logging in today for our first of a series of webinars on blue carbon. Today we have three hosts. My name is Jessica. I will be the moderator of today, the kind of timekeeper, and I will introduce everyone. We have Jimena, who will be managing the chats area. So if you have questions during the presentation, we encourage you to add them to the chat box and Jimena will gather them. And then we also have Sabine, who will be introducing the network to you and get everything started. So without further ado, I will turn everything over to Sabine.
Good morning, everyone. I'll show a short presentation of our network and how it started. Share screen. So everybody sees my screen. Let me put it in the right mode. So good morning, everyone. And this is a little bit about what we have been doing. And it's also thanks to Jessica and Jimena, who have been really working incredibly hard to get this moving. This is the tropical network is for the coastal marine areas in the Caribbean, Gulf and Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific. Let me see this, okay. So we started this based on a workshop that we held on Bonaire a long time ago, and then there was a request to continue this, and we got initial starting funding by the University of Costa Rica, and that runs through August 24. But we are trying to get more additional funding so that we can continue, and this funding helps us to set up a website, to organize webinars, and to organize a workshop. The website is under construction. The webinars are, well, we are starting. We have the socials launched. That's thanks Jessica, and we are working all together on the website. So on the website, we will have a lot of information. It's mostly based on your input also. And so there will be a Google form sent out to everybody for a fact sheet. So we can put all the projects that are in the area relevant to this network to put in information. So we can put a fact sheet with all basic information, and it will link to your project, so we are not involved in updating. That's everybody doing itself. We'll host 3 webinars. This is the first one coming today, and the date and the topic of the next ones, that's still to be decided. The workshop will be in June in Costa Rica. We'll send you the dates and more information. And it will be just like the event that we had in Bonaire. It will be a hybrid, virtual and in person. That's mostly for the presentations, and the fields visit, that will be one day afterwards. So we are aiming at a 3-day workshop. So to stay up to date, follow us on the social media or join our mailing list, and enjoy today's webinar. Thank you. So that's it. So yes.
Sorry, I was having a muting issue. All right, thank you, Sabine. That was great. We're going to start today with our first presentation. We've got Jos Cozijnsen coming from the Climate Neutral Group in the Netherlands, and he's going to introduce blue carbon and tell us more about it. So, Jos, if you can share your screen, feel free to begin. We will try to keep the presentations within the time limit. So we have a 15-minute presentation and 15 minutes of questions. If we don't get to all of the questions today, you can submit additional questions through our social media channel, and we'll make sure to generate content that will answer these questions for you. But yeah, without further ado, thank you, Jos.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. You see my screen now?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. So this is a little bit about our company, Climate Neutral Group. We help with giving insight in the impact of companies and products, of the carbon footprint. We help to make reduction strategies. We provide offsets for the remaining emissions while purchasing credits or developing them ourselves. And we have also a climate neutral certification, a standard, so that companies have a standard they can meet to reach their target. Yeah, for today, a few elements today only. How are carbon credits generated? Where does it come from? And then what's the role of carbon credits? How come we need blended finance for blue carbon? And there were some questions submitted, very good, and I will answer them as well. So how do we get here? Let's see, yeah. So mangrove, oh, I see this site, I have to, sorry, yeah. So how do we get here? Everybody knows that mangrove, salt marshes, seagrass restoration, and conservation projects have many benefits for nature, communities, fishermen, biodiversity, coastal habitation, culture, a lot. But blue carbon also helps avoid global climate change, limiting temperatures and damage. It helps nations to meet their targets to help the global climate problem to be solved. Therefore, the Paris Agreement, that's the climate treaty between countries, can give countries rewards to mangrove projects if they help other countries to restore or protect mangrove. And the voluntary carbon market can give project developers carbon credits for projects. And so carbon credits, they help verify and finance these reductions. Sorry, yeah. And who generates those carbon credits? It can only be done by carbon credit programs. So private programs, and if you submit a project there are requirements for that. And after you meet those requirements, they can issue the certificates you can then sell. And the biggest are the verified carbon standards, also called Verra and Gold Standard. There's also Plan Vivo, which is also important for blue carbon. Of course, those programs will have the requirements before they will issue the carbon credits. The project should be additional. What would happen without the project and credits? It should be real, actual. It should be permanent, of course. And the activity should be measurable following agreed methodologies. And of course, we need independently verification by third parties. And local communities should be involved and benefit. And of course, do no negative harm on the project. And it should always add to sustainable development goals. We always see if you only do things for CO2 with carbon, it doesn't work, it doesn't stay. So you always need to additionally contribute to social development goals. Here are two methodology types of Verra and Plan Vivo. It is sometimes specifically for seagrass restoration. Sometimes it's a wider methodology. It's called RED, avoiding deforestation, and it can occur with forestry, but also mangrove. And the Plan Vivo has its own standard, and it fills exactly the requirements you need to meet, the methodologies, the calculations, the uncertainty tools you have, and often also a buffer to save some of the credits. It always takes a lot of time. Like nature, it costs time. It takes really a while, 1 year or 1.5 before you get actually these certificates issued. You start with the project identification, the project design. That project needs to be validated and registered at Verra or Gold Standard. And then you can start doing the project. You keep on monitoring what you're doing, measure the trees, measure the samples in the soil, and it needs to be verified. And if that then all happens and occurs, you can get the issues certificate. So it takes a while, but it's very important because it needs to be verified and valuable. It's good to see that many southern countries are very interested in hosting projects. In the climate plans, they show we would like to do more in forest protection, in blue carbon, but we need help for that. We need climate finance or carbon credits. So it's very often important to answer those welcoming reports, more or less. We shouldn't go running around the world like a carbon cowboy. Then we should meet the demands, the needs from the countries. And it's very good that in those reports, they already submit those proposals and ideas. It's good to keep in mind that carbon credits have only a limited role to meet the global climate change problems, to solve to get the targets. Our clients always need to reduce the emissions, absolutely. And the remaining emissions, they can be offset, compensated by credits. So that's why we always say it's a combination. You have to do your homework, your absolute reductions, absolute emission reductions with investments locally in your company. And on top of that, you can offset and use those for compensation. You see below there on the left, climate on the right, climate positive, because in the future, for example, if the EU already has reduced all its emissions, no more coal, only renewables, you get to zero. We will need to keep on trees to get more CO2 out of the atmosphere. So these projects need to contain for a long term. So this is how it then would work in the project cycles every year. We need to support landowners and farmers and communities to help avoid the deforestation or to increase the mangrove restoration. It can be monitored. You need to collect the data, the samples of the soil, and so that these data can be assessed and checked by external auditors. And then the carbon credits can be issued by Verra after they've get all the information, documentation, and verified that. And then the carbon credits being issued to the project parties can be sold to companies that want to compensate, and that generates the finance you can then share with local organizations, farmers, and the project parties. You see there on the right that we will also need some co-finance through compensation funds or companies that do philanthropy or government support. And I'll show you in a minute why. This is a recent report written that shows that the carbon market price is still not enough to pay for all the costs. It needs a while to increase the price, and then it might lead to equilibrium and maybe some extra revenues. That shows that you really need the additional finance, and we call it blended finance. And that's the biggest puzzle we have when we start doing mangrove restoration projects. It's really a lot of pieces of the puzzle. There's the carbon issues. What's the potential? Is it really additional? Can we do a project? Can we have access to the site? And you come to the more legal issues. Who's the owner? Can we compensate the owner? And there's always a lot of contracts with the project parties, with Verra. And there's the cost aspect. How much does it cost to get the flooding again in the area? To get drag lines and operators. And if you know the cost, you have to also look at the benefits. The benefits are not only the carbon, but there are also many financial and non-financial co-benefits of mangrove and blue carbon in general. Flood protection, biodiversity, ecotourism, bird watching, kayaking. So many side benefits. And also important locally. And in that case, we also were trying to approach companies and organizations that, do you see those co-benefits, and are you willing to support, to sponsor this project? Because you also have your own benefits, you see. And in that regard, you see sometimes companies pay for the use of trucks or heavy machinery, helping building roads or channels or sand or compensation fees. And this is really the larger picture of mangrove and blue carbon in general. It's a big puzzle with many pieces, and only if you have all the pieces, then it won't work. There's now 2 questions I got received recently, which is good. Very important questions. The one is the carbon market business fair to benefit developing countries? So they sacrifice their wood demands. Is the research or proofs done to convince local communities that they are very much depending on mangroves as the only source of income? And that is true. And we have to look to that specifically. If you would only do it for carbon, and you can't have no other use, then it would not be good, it would not sustain. I can give an example. In Suriname, in Nickerie, in the mangrove forests, the trees were also used a lot for smoking fish. There were many discussions. People have made aware to switch to other practices so that illegal cutting of parva is reduced. And now they use wood from sawmills and also wood from the yamun trees with less impact. And also with the fisheries, they also use trees from the and roots from the mangroves. Fishing sticks are used to set up the nets. We call it crow's feet. They could switch to mora trees, wildwood, in another area, Marataka area, with less vulnerable mangroves. And of course, key is to share the benefits. We always say, and that's really a rule for us, most revenues should go to the local communities, to the users. So in this way, it is fair to do it and also to respond to the needs locally. Second question was also interesting. Is there a guarantee that industrial countries would never stop funding in case of political and administrative condition of the nation? You know, a political situation always differences and always changes. So how can you sustain the project? Important is that permanence is part of the VERA or Plan Vivo requirements. You need to show that in contracts that really sustain, that it will continue the efforts locally. But you have to ensure, of course, local co-benefits, social, economic, biodiversity. You have to show own interest. And that's the way you can really ensure the continuation of the projects. And of course, after a voluntary phase, host country governments should regulate it and give obligations to companies to keep financing the project. So carbon markets can only bring things ahead, can have an early start, but it should be part of the regulation of the normal way of operating. So that was my presentation. This is where you see us preparing a mangrove and seagrass restoration project in Santa Catarina, Brazil. It's a lot of good work, an interesting puzzle, a lot of pieces, and this workshop brings to attention what exactly. Thanks. And there is Sabine again.
Great, thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions on this? That was really interesting, and it's such a new topic. I know a lot of people are still trying to wrap their head around what exactly a blue carbon credit is. So yeah, we'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions.
You should be able to just raise your hand and open up your mic, but if you're having issues, just let us know.
Could I ask a question, please? Hi, Jos. So you spoke there about how the need is for reduction in somebody's carbon footprint before offsetting. And of course, one of the criticisms, the public criticisms around offsetting is that it delays systemic change and people use it as the cheap fix instead of reducing their carbon footprint. What kind of systems or safeguards or mechanisms do you think need to be in place regarding reporting of businesses or anybody's carbon footprint that allows kind of clearer distinction between what they've actually really reduced themselves and what they've offset?
Yeah, the only way is regulation, of course. And there's a lot of regulation in Europe on the industries and energy sector. They can't offset, they need to cut their emissions. They can trade amongst each other, but there's no offsetting. So that's clear. If you regulate it, it's easy. But the rest of the world is still depending on philanthropy, more or less. That companies have the net zero targets and you have to dig into them. Is it true? Is it real? Then it often can enter into greenwashing. It's very difficult. The only thing we can do is to provide transparency. What are you actually doing? NGOs play a very important role in there, but it has to be regulated. And of course, the voluntary carbon market helps countries meet their target, but at the same time, companies keep on emitting, then it doesn't change. Then it's net zero sum game. So it's difficult. And I can only tell that in the Paris Agreement, it's more rigorous. So in the Paris Agreement targets carbon credits, if you dare to get carbon credits for projects, a percentage is taking off that remains for the atmosphere. So that what you can do some kind of discount. But yeah, the rule should be first reduce yourselves, the remaining emissions, after a while offsets. It has to be regulated. That's the only thing we can do. So this workshop also helps there. All our companies need to do both. They need to make their plan. Additionally, they can do offsets. But we know not all companies work like that. So yeah, let's do our best that everybody is joining this. Thanks.
We have a question in the chat from Kate. I don't know if Kate wants to ask it or if you'd like me to read it.
Hi there. Sorry, no. Yeah, I can explain a bit more. It's just that I've had a workshop recently around blue carbon with some of the fishing industry, and they're getting worried that this new, like, now that we've found that, you know, sediments are very important for storing carbon, obviously blue carbon credits, it's just like another avenue for higher polluting industries to offset their emissions, as opposed to actually focusing on moving to greener technologies or reducing their emissions. And also it just opens up a whole new avenue for people to profit off the natural environment, which isn't necessarily the best, I'd say. But so yeah, it's like, is there a risk there? And what lessons have we learned from regulating kind of land carbon credits, and are they being applied already in this kind of new area? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And it's actually true. There's always this risk. So we need to keep on calling them out if they do this. And it should be a cooperation of governments, NGOs, and companies. And if you look, for example, like Conservation International, a very big organization, they say we want to do it with partners. We're not selling our certificates. We want to do it as partners. So if more and more companies, more and more organizations, and the good thing is in blue carbon is still a new area, and with a lot of good organizations working on that. If they have the same policy, the same code of conduct, then it could work. If not, it's really a cooperation between governments and NGOs and organizations. That risk is really there. We can only call them out and show how we do this and get support for that. Thanks.
Do we have any more questions? I think that's really interesting. And I think we can keep talking as we move along as well. And like, if anybody has a question that they'll figure out later, we can certainly ask it afterwards. So I think we can move on, Jessica, if you want.
Thanks.
Thank
you so much, Jos. Yeah, and just to comment, this whole presentation is being recorded. So we will load this on YouTube and on our social media. So if anyone wants to go back and re-listen to any of these, because there is quite a lot of information we're covering, that will be made available to you. And then, yeah, like Jimena said, after this, we'll also be available if you wanted to submit your questions to the network. We'll be able to facilitate communications that way by, we can generate content to answer it, as well as put you in contact with someone who will be able to better answer it. All right, well, thank you so much. Now we will move to Manuela. Manuela is coming to us from WildSense, and she's going to talk to us about validating carbon credits using tech. So Manuela, if you are available, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Hello, everyone. Thanks everyone who is attending. Can you see my screen properly?
Yes, I think you have to put it in presenter mode.
Yeah. Up.
Like that.
Okay, is this good for everyone? Okay, cool. So once again, thanks. So just for you to understand what we do quickly, like I'm not going to go deep into our activities. So what we do, like we have a mission that is to build a wider world. So put it very quickly. What we do, so just like Jos just presented, saying that there are carbon programs, we are a new carbon program that is arriving in the market, just like Vera, Go Standards, Plum Vivo. And we certify for the voluntary carbon market. So why am I talking to you guys today? Is because one of the main problems with the certification industry that we face today is that it costs a lot of money for you to get your project certified, and it takes a lot of time for you to get your project certified. So it can take up to 3 or 5 years in some cases, depending on the size of your project, the type, the location, and the pathway that you choose to follow. And what we gathered per mission, and by having this system, we end up excluding a very big chunk of people who are actually doing amazing restoration work, right? But they just can't access this type of financing. And then it becomes a snowball, because these are the people that actually need more, because the ones that can actually afford to go through this huge certification, maybe they could actually access the money either way. So what we are understanding is that by using cutting edge technology that is tailor-made for smaller projects, you can actually do it way faster with a higher level of certainty because you're using digital technologies. So this is our approach now. Why am I not? Okay. So we've certified so far more than 100 hectares that have been restored. You can see where we've been working. And what we do is that we use what is called digital MRV. So we follow the same procedure as Jos just presented for everyone, meaning we go through the PDD, which is when the project is actually developed by the developer. Then we will have a third-party auditing to certify the baseline, except how we collect all of our monitoring, reporting, and even the data that we are going to send to verification by a third party is done digitally. So we are using digital technology that goes from satellite imagery through our partnership with the French and European space agencies, that is then run through our own internal data and engineering team so that they can calculate the carbon sequestration done both on the land and also on reference ecosystems. But we are also developing digital tooling that can go to the field with the developer, which means that the developer themselves can actually produce the data that otherwise we would have to send someone each year to the ground to verify. One question that we often receive when we say this is, but then how do you know what you're receiving is true and that people are not just like sending you pictures of trees that are actually somewhere else, and you don't actually know if they're there or not. So all of the tooling that we've developed is embedded with technology that uses either geolocalization or timestamp or both in most cases. So we obviously we ask them to prove everything they're doing all the time. And this makes us have a very precise monitoring system, and that it's actually done step by step. So we receive the plan from a developer, and instead of waiting 1 year to send someone to the ground, what digital technology is allowing us today is to actually verify each single step a project developer is doing. And this also allows the verifying entities to act on the ground way faster if you see that there is a problem. So for example, if you see that a project developer is lagging behind on their activities, maybe it's not an issue if you start lagging behind 1-2 months, but then if 6 months into the project, you see that someone is actually not performing their activities, it means that there is an issue happening and that there is an action that needs to be taken for the issue to be solved. So we can now benefit of these types of technology that in theory should only evolve to actually reduce costs, because if the developer is already on the ground, it costs way less for them to send you the data than for you to actually send an auditor all the way from Europe to go check something that is happening in Madagascar. And enables more people to join the carbon market, which is great, because this way we can create more capillarity into the carbon financing. And here I'm only talking about carbon, but in our standard and as on other standards such as Plan Vivo, there are a lot of other requirements that go into, for example, how you share these benefits with the community. And most specifically in terms of biodiversity and ecological restoration, which is specifically our focus. We only work with ecological restoration. And in this case as well, there is a lot of new technologies that are arriving and that actually allow a much better monitoring process. There are still challenges on how to access some of the biodiversity technologies. So for example, nowadays you have bioacoustic solution that is basically sensors that can capture the noise of a forest or of a mangrove, and then maybe you can interpret them. And for a specific case of mangroves, for example, you can have eDNA. All of these are still kind of experimental, and if used alone, then they are probably not going to provide you with 100% of the data you need. But if combined with field observation, especially done by locals, more than auditors, because locals, they know, right? They know how the mangrove was 50 years ago usually. So they know what they're looking for and they know what to observe. When you combine all the layers of information that you can gather, both from digital monitoring and from ground observation that can then be reported digitally by the developers and through the tooling, you can actually get a much better understanding of what is actually happening on the ground, and thus have a more reliable certification. So this is what we've been doing right now, and these are all the pillars that we are able to monitor digitally nowadays. And again, when I say digitally, keeping in mind that there is a mix to be done of digital tooling that can be used by itself with reporting from the ground while keeping the integrity of the data being reported. And this is just for you guys to understand, like, by doing this, we can still follow the same procedure that every other standard does by sending people to the ground, except doing it with digital support to make it faster and cheaper and create capillarity. So this was already done, but just to say that this also allows you to respect the 4 core carbon principles. So, for example, one thing that is questioned today is about additionality. There has been a lot of buzz around this word on the market recently. And digital technology, what it also allows you is for you to capture the data without being an auditor that goes to measure and count trees, where you can actually have a very big margin of error. But by using satellite imagery or even doing LiDAR mapping, you can actually allow for more transparency and make the data available for everyone to verify and ensure additionality is taking place in a set project. So this is just an example of what we do now. So you can actually convert what you see, up, just so I can have a better view. So you can actually receive today's satellite imagery, and you can convert into understanding what this means and how these ecosystems and land are going to be able to capture carbon from the atmosphere. And I'm sorry, up. So voila. So this allows you to monitor the evolution of forest covers, and it works both for land forests and for mangrove forests. And yeah, this is an old version. So just to say that one other aspect of all this digital tooling is that it's not available. If you think like who is working with eDNA, for example, is not accessible to everyone everywhere. So when talking about digital MRV, it's really important to keep in mind that we should make sure that the technology we are developing can be accessed and embedded in what is available in terms of local technology. This is why what we are working with now is an application that goes on everyone's phone. And all the other toolings are more robust, let's say. They are experimental on a case-by-case basis, but just by managing to have on the phone technology, we enable this to reach a much bigger audience. And voila, I think this is all I have to say. I have some pretty pictures if you would like to see, but I think the rough part of our what we envision of digital monitoring is said. I don't know if maybe we should address the questions we have already received. So someone asked, who is the owner of the carbon offset? So this will vary. There is not one single answer because some countries have decided to nationalize their credits. So this can be, in some countries, maybe this can be counted as their own emission reduction. Usually, like in most places, it will belong to the landowner. And what is done is that the project operator or project developer has a contract with the landowner where the landowner grants them rights to exploit these credits in exchange of benefits. So these benefits can vary. It's really on a case by case. It will depend if it's a private landowner or if it's community managed. So it will depend on where your project is based. But as an overall, let's say if you would do a percentage, most of the projects we see arriving on the market, it actually belongs to the landowner that then does an agreement with the organization, like carrying the project themselves. And how often do you have to revalidate your carbon credits? So actually how this works is that your credits, they are validated by an independent third party. So you have the certificator, and then this goes through a VVB, which is a validation and verifying body. And once it passes by a VVB, you have the right to use these credits either to offsetting or to contribution. This will depend either on the local legislation or on the requirements imposed by the standard that is actually certifying the carbon. For example, we have our own rules on how people can use our credits to contribute or to offset because we chose to do it this way. And once it's actually validated by a VVB, it's validated by a VVB, but usually you have a period in which you are allowed to retire these credits. And then this will also depend on each program. But once it's done, it's done. Does anyone have any question?
Great. Thank you so much, Manuela. That was super interesting.
I have one. Manuela, at one point you said that you said a number of, like, I think 200 hectares, and you had 100,000 credits. Are those credits like future credits, or are they already removed from the atmosphere?
So this, I don't remember saying this, but I can explain, like, this will depend on how the carbon program works. It can be either what is called ex ante credits. So how we personally work at WildSense, we do what we call like projected restoration units. So we do an assessment of a project and we project how much this project is going to be able to capture. This is considered ex ante credits. Why we do it this way is because we understand projects need to receive financing in order for them to kickstart, instead of having them started and then certifying. So we do a pre-financing system. Except so these credits, they exist and they can be sold, but they cannot be used. So what this means is if you are a company and you want to buy these credits, you can buy them. They will be an investment. And then what we on our side we do is that every single year we verify if the projection was actually met. And then once the third party body, so once the auditor comes and stamps our verification, then these credits can be used for offsetting our contribution purposes, but not before. Otherwise, we don't comply. I mean, Some people do it, but otherwise you don't comply with the market because you're actually, you're not proving, it was captured. So voila. So we do the pre-financing mechanism just because we understand that projects need to be financed before they can start selling credits. Otherwise, how will they access funds? But then they can only be used for retirement and contribution once they've been audited.
Okay, thank you.
We have a couple questions in the chat. Sylvie asks, how far back can you certify projects for a project that's already implemented?
So we personally, we don't certify projects that have already started because we do a very thorough analysis of baseline. So if the project has already started, it's harder for us to determine baseline, which can incur in errors in terms of additionality calculation. So we chose right now not to take chances on malcalculation of additionality, and we only certify projects that are to be started, also because we work with pre-financing. So, and so Kate asked what monitoring is in place to make sure pre-finance credits actually result in restored areas. So we do the projection, as I said, and then we have data from the field, as I mentioned. So we ask project developers to report back to us. Some of the reporting comes monthly, others are quarterly, and others are annually. It depends on what is the topic that is being checked, like monitored. But for carbon credit, like the carbon in itself, so we have seedlings mortality rates, then we are gonna have satellite imagery, then we are gonna have in-person auditing and also LiDAR flights. It will depend on the size of the project, and it will depend on the time frame that we are talking, because for example, for the first 3 years of planting a project, you're probably not going to be able to see any forest evolution. Like there is no evolution that can be visible through satellite imagery unless it's super defined, but then your carbon capturing is actually not super relevant. Starting on year 5, then we rely much more on satellite imagery and on the ground auditing that can be done either by an auditor that actually goes and measures sample plots, or by LiDAR flights if we're talking about bigger projects. And then all of this work is audited by third parties. So yeah, it's a chain of verification, let's say. Then there is, I think it's also a question from Kate. There is also an issue that newly restored areas aren't as good as capturing and storing carbon for a time scale relevant to climate mitigation. Yeah, so usually what we do in our projects is that they don't, what we call projected units, even though they're verified every year, but we don't convert them in what we are calling audited units until year 5. So you cannot expect to retire any credits before 5 years. And this is also why, like, if you look at the market right now, loads of projects, they only actually start certifying at year 3. And because then you actually already have material, right? They are not certifying before they even start planting. We do it like this because we want to make sure money arrives to the ground. Like we have, for example, rules on how much of the investment, on how much of the price of the carbon credit needs to actually go to the ground. So we try to cut the middleman. Yeah, just
to add that the aspect about that you cannot really compensate fossil fuel emissions, coal, with biomass. Yeah, that is really indeed the case if a forest, a tree, dies after 40 years and carbon is still in the atmosphere. So indeed, in the wider scheme, we need to recalculate now and then what it really means. And that's why it's good that carbon projects are often very conservative, but it's a good point. You always need to be very careful that it's not a way out, it's a bit of it, and we need to be calculate very well. So that was maybe the question was focused on. Thanks.
Yeah, so and besides that, like internally, we also have rules on how our credits can be used. As you were mentioning, just like you need to do your homework before you can offset. Like we, for example, we have these rules on how our credits can be used. Like we don't allow them to be used. Let's say, oh, let's build a new carbon mine here and offset it there. We impose certain restriction on this side. And does anyone have any other question or?
How are we on time, Jessica?
Yeah, we're doing well. So yeah, if we can take some more questions, and otherwise, if everyone's happy, we can move on to our last topic.
I had a question actually, because my experience with the carbon credits is that as far as blue carbon habitats, it mostly focuses on mangroves. And my understanding is that we're moving towards more seagrass components or projects being developed. But I just wanted to know, like from your perspectives, how we're doing on sort of the ratio as far as like seagrass versus mangroves or salt marsh projects out there as far as carbon credits.
To be completely transparent, I don't have a precise answer. For what we see arriving around us, let's say, or projects being directed to us, it's still a lot of mangrove. Like I think most of the projects we see arriving for us, it comes from like inland reforestation. Though there is a big boom and hype around blue carbon right now happening. Like we have a lot of people that come to us and say, don't you have a project that you certified around mangrove? So it's still booming. And I still think it's the majority, but maybe that's just us. I don't know. Maybe that's just because we already certified a few and then people only come to us for this.
If Manuela doesn't mind, I could hop in on that seagrass point there.
Yeah, please go.
Thank you. So we've actually been doing a wee bit of seagrass work, which I actually wanted to discuss next, but I had to cut it because of time. So quite glad to have an opportunity to talk about it. But so at the moment, as far as I'm aware, and I'm happy to be corrected if anybody knows otherwise, but there's currently no projects in the world actually certified to issue seagrass carbon credits. I know that there's one on the verge of certification, I believe. That's one run by the TNC in Virginia. It's the Virginia, I could get the name wrong, but I think it's the Virginia Coastal Reserve, and they are looking to get certified by Verra for seagrass restoration, interestingly, rather than protection. I don't know details of what the status of that is, but I know that it's been under development for a few years now. But as far as I'm aware, that's the only project that's that close to certification, although, yeah, as I say, happy to be corrected. We've been doing a wee bit of work on looking at seagrass in our own projects, and there's a lot of barriers to certifying seagrass, and the kind of core part of it is the cost benefit analysis that Manuela mentioned, and so seagrass on average contains about 1/5 of the carbon that mangroves do. That varies by species, but that's an average number. But the monitoring and reporting and everything of measuring seagrass carbon is really high. You have to go out in boats, you have to take sediment cores. You're entirely dependent on sediment carbon, which is the key thing. In mangroves, you can measure the biomass. It's cheaper, well, relatively cheaper and easier to measure. With seagrass, you actually have to physically get cores out of the sea, take them to a laboratory, measure them for seagrass carbon, for sediment carbon. And so that sends your costs up. So on a kind of a cost benefit ratio, it's just not really quite stacking up for seagrass, from our experience anyway.
And I think there is also a problem of like, what are the models that you actually use to calculate them? Because I mean, there is an issue, not an issue, but you don't calculate everything the same way. So, and mangroves, they capture a lot of carbon, so it's a very profitable, let's say, type of project. It's hard to compete with.
Thank you both. I'm not aware of a project either. I know that the Australians are working hard on moving that along as well, but I'm not aware of one. We also have,
we don't certify them, for example. We don't think we are 100% safe of ourselves to run this type of certification right now.
we have one more question from Kate. The sediment samples collected from research studies are sparse, if that's how you say it, as part of the verification system. Are sediment cores analyzed, and can this contribute to academic studies, i.e. collected in standardized manner and made public?
So as I said, like right now, we ourselves, we don't do it. I think also in the part of contribute to academic studies, I think this will depend on the approach of each program. In theory, the data you collect is your own. I can say that the approach we are trying to have is to make partnerships all around the world with research institutions in which we provide them with the data we collect, because we do run, for example, LiDAR flights and on-the-ground measurements to collect reference data. And we want to make this available also because we are probably going to benefit from theirs as well. So our goal is to build an open source data bank. But yeah, I honestly, I don't know what to tell you because we don't certify this type of projects.
So I think we'll leave the questions there, Jessica, as far as time, and then just remind everybody that you can always send your questions afterwards or write them up in the chat as well.
Yeah, this was actually a great transition because Robyn is going to be our last presenter today. She's going to cover community-led conservation projects. She's coming to us from the Association for Coastal Ecosystem Services. So yeah, it's nice that we've already had a brief introduction, and now she can tell us a little bit more about what she's doing.
Thanks, Jessica. I will just share my screen and hopefully it will work first time. Is that okay? Is that showing?
I think it's in the presenter notes,
Okay.
so just change the display. Yeah. There you go.
That's okay.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
So yeah, so like Jessica said, I'm from the Association for Coastal Ecosystem Services, which is a little bit of a mouthful, so we're ACS for short. So just a wee bit about who we are. We are a Scottish-based charity. We've been going for just over 10 years now, and we support community-led conservation of blue carbon, mostly in Kenya, but also support some other projects elsewhere in Africa and beyond. So we're the project coordinators of the Mukoko Pamoja and the Banga Blue Forest projects in Kenya, which are certified under the Plan Vivo standard, which you just mentioned earlier. And so our role in the projects, we were established alongside Mukoko Pamoja 10, 11 years ago. And our role is to kind of provide the high level project management support to the projects. And so by that, I mean, we help with gaining certification, we help with kind of guiding the community group in managing the projects, making sure that they're complying with the Plan Vivo standard. But on the ground, the projects are both managed on a kind of day-to-day basis by local, they're called CBOs, the community-based organizations that the projects are established as. And another key role that we have is to trade the carbon credits on behalf of the communities. So we work as part of a partnership. So as I say, we work with these CBOs, the community-based organizations that kind of make the core of each project. And we work with research institutions, both in Kenya and internationally. So on the ground, we have Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute at Comfrey. They have a local research station in one of the villages where our projects are, and they were key players in getting the Mukoko Pamoja project established as well. And also Edinburgh Napier University and Bangor University, both in the UK, we're quite closely linked with. And then government agencies as well. And there the key one is the KFS, the Kenya Forest Service, who are the Kenyan Forest Agency, who basically the projects are devolved, the tenureship of the projects is devolved under a co-management agreement, which is between KFS and the community groups. So although Macoca Pomoja and Bangor Blue Forest are our kind of our core projects, and there are 2 certified projects, we work with community groups elsewhere in the world who are interested in blue carbon conservation. And this can be through carbon certification or other routes. So I'll be talking a little bit later about the limitations of carbon for communities. And so our role is really just kind of helping guide community groups in finding what the best way forward for them is when they're wanting to conserve blue carbon ecosystems. This is where we work. This is Kenya. Most people, when they think about Kenyan wildlife, you think about the safari and the plains and lions and giraffes and elephants and so on. But Kenya does have a relatively short but wonderful coast. So this is the coastline down here, and right down at the southern tip is where we work. This is the border between Kenya and Tanzania, and actually our Bangor Blue Forest project literally just borders Tanzania, so as far south as you can go in Kenya. So there's a few kind of hotspots for mangroves in Kenya. We're down at the bottom of Kwale County here. You've also got some around Mombasa and Kilifi County, and actually up here in Lamu, you can see the creeks there. It's quite a hotspot for mangroves and seagrass in Kenya. So a little bit about our 2 projects. They collectively protect 580 hectares of mangroves, and they restore about 4.5 hectares. So the vast majority of the projects focus on protection rather than restoration. And actually, Kate, in the comments, she really hit on it earlier when she said, actually, planting mangroves doesn't capture very much carbon at all, at least in the early stages. And that's part of the reason for this split. We claim a lot less carbon per hectare for restoration than we do protection. That's not to say restoration isn't the best way forwards. It's a tricky thing to do in mangrove ecosystems, mangrove forests. It's getting mangrove planting right is not an easy task. And so we have been experimenting with the best way to do it in both our sites. They're both quite different. But on the whole, we get, for our money, we basically get the best return on carbon from protecting what's there. And actually, arguably, from a biodiversity point of view as well, it's much more important to protect these kind of mature forests that are already there and supporting populations of plants and animals and everything, and yeah, making sure that's protected rather than planting new forests. And so where we work, the main threat to these mangroves is degradation caused by timber extraction, and that's on a fairly small scale. It's around about 2% a year, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but it adds up through the years. And poverty is the real driver of degradation in the area. It's small scale cutting for sustenance and for things like firewood, for cooking, and for timber. So both projects, they're locally constituted as CBOs, the community-based organizations that I spoke about. They're locally governed and staffed and managed. So as CBOs, they have a committee that kind of provides the strategic direction and decision-making on behalf of the wider community. And local people vote those committee members into place. And staffed, I'll actually talk on that a little bit later, staffed by Kenyan or as local people as possible. And yeah, as I say, they have kind of this wider community input through voting rights. So they vote on who represents them on the community board and then on the committee, but also on things like how money is spent. And they also get really engaged in a practical way. So they get involved in monitoring exercises, in tree planting and things like that. So the projects, I think Jos actually spoke about this earlier about kind of compensating for the negative impacts of projects. So we are preventing people from cutting mangroves that they would otherwise cut for their livelihoods and sustenance. So the projects maintain community-led, community-run woodlots of casuarina trees, which are kind of a fast-growing terrestrial tree. And so the amount of timber that was calculated as being lost to the mangrove forest is the kind of dictates how many trees are planted to make sure that there's an adequate amount of timber being replaced. And the key element of the projects is the community development funds. And this makes up around about 1/3 of the expenditure by the projects. So as I said, poverty is a key driver of degradation in the area. So a large element of the project is kind of giving back to the local community. And so around about a third of the funds are allocated to this fund. So a third of the income is allocated to this fund, and local people will vote on how it's spent. So in the past, it's funded things like the construction of wells and water points. That's the picture on the right here. Renovation of school buildings and provision of materials for schools and local hospitals, and youth groups and things like that. So just a wee pretty picture here. This is our Vanga Blue Forest site. So this is the village of Vanga. You can see the kind of degradation that happens over on the other side of the creek. You can see relatively intact mangrove forest, and even on this side of the creek here. But as you get closer to the settlement, you can see where it's been degraded. And then in the bottom left here, you can see a kind of a rectangle area that's been clear cut. That was clear cut to make a salt pan many years ago. The salt pan failed as a business, and the area has just kind of remained this hypersaline environment. So that's where our replanting is happening in the Vanga site. We're taking a more of a ecological restoration approach, which means kind of just creating the enabling conditions for mangroves to grow rather than just sticking trees in the ground. So that involves things like taking down the dikes that were built up to keep the area saline, to allow water to flush through it. So I think both the panelists before me have spoken about different carbon standards, so I don't actually think I need to explain what a carbon standard is anymore. So we're accredited to the Plan Vivo standard, and their key focus is on poverty alleviation. And so, although as a carbon standard, their key role is to kind of verify how much carbon the projects are sequestering. Poverty, they kind of use carbon as a vehicle to achieving poverty alleviation. They have really strong community focus, so they want to see projects that like kind of very meaningfully engage local people, and focus on these small scale but high value projects. So you hear about all kinds of carbon projects in the world, things like the kind of large scale tree planting or kind of renewables projects that generates large numbers of credits, but those credits might be worth kind of a few dollars because it's just kind of mass producing carbon benefits. Whereas Plan Vivo aren't about going for the high numbers so much as focusing on kind of quality over quantity. So what I wanted to speak about was the kind of benefits and limitations that that carbon has when it in a community context. So one of the biggest benefits, and one of the reasons way back 10 years ago when we chose to develop a blue carbon project, is they provide a sustainable and a predictable source of income. So although this can vary year by year depending on how well you hit your targets, how many trees you plant and so on, you can roughly kind of predict the amount of income that you'll get each year. And while there's work put into annual reporting to kind of show that you've actually generated this carbon income, you're not kind of going out and applying for, say, grant funding, which would be an alternative source of income each year. And with the carbon standards, it provides this really structured and monitored involvement with local people. So it's basically a quality assurance to show that your project is actually kind of meaningfully engaging local people, making sure that the impact on local people has been adequately assessed and mitigated. So yeah, it's just kind of a bit of safeguarding for local people, having that set of rules that projects have to abide by. And it's a really good way of demonstrating the value of nature beyond extraction. So this is a funny one because I think Jos mentioned earlier, there's an argument to be had around the ethics of valuing nature. And I think my thoughts on that are that it's not an ideal scenario that we're putting an amount of dollars on nature. But I also think that, you know, we have to act so fast to tackle the climate crisis. And time and time again, you see evidence that we're just not acting fast enough. And so I kind of see this valuation of nature as a stopgap to kind of achieve positive outcomes for now and achieve carbon benefits for now. But in the long run, it's, perhaps a system that could be replaced. But in the short term, it shows, especially for local people who, when you hear about the value of nature, you might read an academic paper about the economic value that mangroves bring through kind of coastal protection or biodiversity enhancement, fisheries enhancement. But that's never, or it's very difficult for somebody who actually depends on those mangroves for their livelihoods to see and to benefit from that economic value. Whereas going out and cutting down trees and selling the timber does bring that very tangible economic value. So it brings protecting nature into the kind of realm of actual cash in hand, effectively. But having said all that, it does have its challenges. So we've spoken, Manuela spoke about how the kind of high technical and scientific burden of achieving carbon certification. And, while approaches like Manuela's are possible to minimize the work involved in kind of gathering data, reporting and things like that, putting together the PDD, which is the project design document, your kind of core document that sets out your project, is still a massive task and often outside the capability of community groups. So often a partnership approach like ours is necessary. And while that's not a bad thing in itself, and it's a model that is kind of often used in conservation, I think the key thing here is when you're bringing in money, kind of income for the project, it starts to potentially raise kind of conflict or tensions around benefit sharing, who gets that money, who deserves all of that money, who actually owns the project. Excuse me. And because it's so complex, the local people, so actually to put this into context, our sites are fairly remote. They're small villages, they have high level of poverty. In our Vanga Blue Forest site, only about 10% of people actually complete high school. So I don't mean this in any way in a patronizing way, but getting anybody to understand, I guess anybody else that's outside this sort of scientific sphere, to understand the concept of carbon sequestration and why that brings in money is really difficult. I think every time I see my family, somebody asks me like, oh, what actually is it that you do again? It's a complex concept. And I think unless local people truly fully understand the concepts of the project, basically I think true ownership and true ownership is very much reliant on a full and comprehensive understanding, and 50-page PDD doesn't exactly help that when it's in a language that not everybody understands, but also your target audience may not even be literate. So I think that there's definitely kind of a trade-off between scientific accuracy and scientific rigor involved in carbon certification, but actually also the accessibility to local people. And then finally, in scaling these projects up, we often, I guess our main criticism of ourselves is that we're a small boutique project. I think that the project has shown benefits for the environment, for climate, for local people, but it's very intensive in terms of the time that you put in. I guess time is the main resource that is intensive in. Makoko Pamoja, it was the first blue carbon project to be certified on the carbon market, on the voluntary carbon market, and it was 5 to 6 years in development, and a lot of that was just working through it with local people, making sure everybody was happy, and then that's an ongoing task. Is ensuring local buy-in isn't just a tick box exercise at the start. You have to maintain it as you go through. And so once you start scaling that to many more communities and bigger populations of people, that inevitably becomes more difficult. So yeah, that's everything that I was going to speak about. And yeah, would welcome any questions. In fact, I've got a couple that were sent to me beforehand, so I can take those first. So the first one was, if a small project would like to get started, what would be the first steps? Sorry, I'll just stop sharing so you can see. There we go. So yeah, what would be the first steps to a project getting started? I would say, you know, I think Manuela mentioned the kind of blue carbon boom that's happening just now. Everyone is getting so excited about blue carbon. And my first piece of advice to people is just to kind of step back and do your own kind of feasibility assessment of what you're doing. Kind of fully understand the boxes that you're going to need to tick. Looking at a carbon standard is really helpful. The carbon standards all have their standard available on their website, and just look at what kind of evidence you're going to have to provide, what structures you need to be in place, what processes you're going to have to go through, what resources you need in terms of money, time, knowledge, skills, expertise. Looking at things like tenureship. Do you have tenureship of the area? Is it private land? In which case you do, but if it's public land, you might need to look at getting that tenureship devolved to you. Looking at things like support of the local community. I think that's really important. Identifying the main threats to the land and saying, can I actually tackle these, and can I tackle them in a way that's measurable and can be demonstrated, because you're going to have to demonstrate that you are mitigating or you're reducing those threats to be able to claim that carbon benefit. Yeah, I think that's, although it's a bit more than a first step, but that's some advice that I would give. And then the second question is, can a private individual claim a carbon benefit from private land? And the answer to that is yeah, absolutely. In fact, in some cases, it's the most straightforward mechanism, because once you look at public land, you have to look at devolution of tenureship. And also, as I can't remember if it was Manuela or Jos mentioned earlier, some governments are looking at kind of nationalisation of carbon. They have their own carbon footprints to mitigate. So there's several countries that are saying, well, actually, hang on, you know, we might want to take a cut of this carbon, or we might want to take it all ourselves and give it back to the community, that kind of thing. So actually, private land setup is most likely to be the most straightforward. And yeah, I'd welcome any more questions. Are there any in the chat?
Thank you. I think there's one at least in the chat, and then Manuela raised her hand.
Has ACES worked with faith groups, and more specifically with the Presbyterian Church in the USA on blue carbon projects? Presbyterian Church USA has moved into the financing blue carbon. We actually haven't. We've never really had anything to do with the USA projects-wise, but that's really interesting to know. Yeah, in terms of I would say faith has an interesting aspect on our projects, and that's actually, funnily enough, yesterday I gave an interview on the Voice of Islam radio in the UK, and we touched on this a bit, and we talked about what effect does faith have on the projects. And something that they said was really interesting was that when something comes from people of your, I can't remember what the wording was, of your types, of people of your same mindset, you're more likely to listen. And so the areas that we work in are around about 95% Muslim and 5% Christian. And I think the churches and faith really provides a kind of cohesiveness to the projects. It's in a way that's, you know, in the UK, you know, for example, things like a community council has relatively low participation rates among the community. Where we work in Kenya, you hold a baraza somewhere public, somewhere outside, and the majority of people come along. There's a kind of a nice cohesiveness there that is partly kind of just community based, but I think also there's an element of faith in that as well. Manuela, did you have your hand up?
Yes, so thanks for the presentation. Super interesting, and congrats on the work you guys been doing. We at Wildsense, we have a huge community and social pillar, and it's actually not considered a co-benefit, but it's a main requirement for a project to be able to be certified. And one of the questions we raised internally with consultants and on consultations is, how do you best do the monitoring and the auditing of what was planned as an outcome and what is really there? Because as we are talking about livelihoods and as we are talking about people, data is not raw, is not concrete, is actually super subjective to each individual participating in this community. And you need to achieve some type of cohesion so you can assess if you achieve the outcomes or not. And I think this is our biggest question in terms of livelihoods. Like, and I would love to know how you handle the assessment of your own outcomes, given the how to say, the subtlety of data being collected.
Exactly, it's very subjective, isn't it, when you're gathering social data? It's an interesting one. We have a few kind of hard data points that we collect, things like mangrove related jobs that have been created and things like that we report on. I would say it's hard. I wouldn't say those are the most meaningful pieces of data on their own. We tend to have somebody who's embedded within Comfrey, the Kenyan research institution that I mentioned, who's a dedicated social impact officer for the project. And so we try and aim for every year, but you don't want to be a pest and keep going out interviewing the community every year. But every maybe 2 to 3 years, she'll go out and do a bit of a survey of the community, largely around if they're satisfied with the project's benefits to them, the project's any impacts that it's having on the community, things like participation, governance, and kind of ensuring that they're happy with the project. And that kind of forms the bulk of our social impact reporting. We recently carried out just kind of a bit of standalone academic study into justice in the projects, which was really interesting. So we got a Kenyan researcher to carry out some focus groups and some interviews, and just kind of exploring what local people's perception of justice is in these projects. And that's actually largely, that was stemmed from one of the public criticisms of carbon offsetting, is that it's not fair that the West is emitting all of this carbon and compensating for it by what people say is kind of pushing the burden onto developing nations, where the majority of carbon projects are located. Our counter argument to that is that carbon projects don't have to be a burden; they can be beneficial to local people. But we wanted to kind of explore that among the local community. So we're just about to publish a paper with the results of that.
I would love to read it. I mean, once you publish, please share.
Yeah, I can send that over.
Thanks.
No, and of course,
Jos has a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Just to add that indeed, as you also heard from my presentation, it's very important that you have local empowerment, that you provide to the community and the people that live there own the information as well, the data. What we often do is to work as much as possible with local or regional universities. Especially young students at the time are very enthusiastic about these kind of issues. They want to be involved, helping with samples. Another thing is you try to use drones. The drones give local people a lot of information, a lot of empowerment. So it's a very important way that you really make them partner empowerment, because that really increases the better monitoring as well. So thanks, that's just an addition, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. Yeah, it's obviously embedded in our work that the local people are involved at all stages. And actually, one thing that we've been doing recently is we launched a pilot of what we're calling the Forest Scholars project program. So kind of going back to the point about low educational attainment in the area, and just trying to plug that gap in our kind of small way. It's just taking youth from the area and training them in data collection, data processing, data presenting, and things like that to basically just kind of upskill them in a forest context, and so that they can become ambassadors for the project.
And I think Kastida-san, I'm sorry if I'm saying the name wrong, mentioned women participation as a reason for success on the project in Gazi Bay. So I don't know if you want to say anything else or about that topic.
Yeah.
I personally visited Gazi Bay
Oh,
to
did
see
you?
the project.
Fantastic. When did you go?
The women participation is very strong in that area. I think the women participation is the reason for the success of the project. So we have to emphasize participation of women in carbon projects in the future.
Absolutely. There's a quote that I always love when we were hiring a project coordinator once. You would have met, well, maybe you'd have met Dr. Cairo when you were in Gazi. So he's a big,
Yes.
very charismatic male figurehead of the project. And we were hiring we were hiring the coordinator for Vango Blue Forest when it launched. And he said to me, I want to hire a woman because if you want to get something done on the Kenyan coast, you hire a woman to do it.
Yes.
But yeah, so and also in Kenyan legislation or Kenyan policies is to ensure kind of a 1/3 or 30% representation of women in positions of governance and authority. So we abide by that, and we make sure at least 1/3 of our committees are women. I think one of the pictures in my presentation was a woman presenting on the mangrove boardwalk, which I hope you visited. And so that's it's the women's boardwalk. It's not directly linked to the project, but it's kind of very well. It's not directly part of the project, but it's related, and it's a collection of women who provide these guided tours through the mangrove forest to visitors.
Exactly.
And so it's just another kind of employment opportunity for women. Thanks for your question.
That's great questions. It's been so interesting. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I've seen that Fawn is asking if the paper on perceptions of justice can be shared in the chat. It's not quite published yet. It's just been submitted for the final time. What will hopefully be the final time. But if you drop me a line with your email address, I'd be more than happy to share that when it gets published. I'll just pop my email in the chat there in case you didn't get it.
Yeah, and Robyn, if you share that with our network, the Tropical Restoration Network, we'll be sure to highlight that on our social media account for you.
Great, thank you.
I don't think there are any more questions. I don't see any hands. Anything else? Nope. I'll pass it on to Jessica.
All right, guys, thank you so much. This has been so fascinating to see it from implementation to like kind of the theory behind carbon credits. This is really, it was quite a broad topic, and we knew that going in. So I really want to thank all of our presenters today. This was really fascinating. I know as we kind of digest this, I'm sure we even have more questions in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. So please feel free to, I'll go ahead and share some links in the chat. This is our mailing list for the Tropical Restoration Network. We will do our best to not bombard you with mail, but we will try to keep you up to date on the network. We also have our social media for Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn have gone live. So as papers like Robyn's get published, we would be happy to share it on the social media account to help get this information out, because there's so much being done, and sometimes it can be kind of difficult to collect it all. So our goal is we want to get this network to facilitate communication, and this wouldn't be possible without the presenters or the people participating. So thank you across the board to everyone, and stay tuned for our next in our series.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.